Thank you, buddy. The St. John real estate market for the month of January 2026 hit 4.3 months of inventory, meaning we are officially into a balanced market. Now, I know what you're thinking. The market's cooling and it's time to panic. But actually, we have been here before. And what happened last time we went into a balanced market surprised a lot of people. So in this video, I'm going to be going over how this has happened before, what happened next, and what this all means for you, whether you're looking to buy or sell coming into the spring. How's it going, everybody? My name is Brandon Vincent. I'm a real estate agent here in St. John, New Brunswick. I've been actively selling real estate for over 7 years now. My goal on this channel is to bring you relevant real estate information in an entertaining way. If you like the sound of that, do me a favor, hit the like and subscribe button, follow along for the journey. But without further ado, let's dive into this January 2026 market update for St. John. To have a proper understanding of the St. John real estate market, it is critical that we look at the Canadian real estate market as a whole and then slowly zoom in through New Brunswick and see what is going on, and then looking directly at St. John, because when you understand the full picture, it makes a lot more sense as to what is going on here locally. The Canadian real estate market in early 2026 is characterized by a soft landing with diverging regional trends following a 1.9% decline in national home sales in late 2025, while major markets like Toronto, Vancouver face downward pressure and high condo inventory. Areas such as Quebec City and Regina are seeing strong price growth. So this is an article from CBC, What's in Store for Canada's Housing Market in 2026. And the annual home sales dropped by 1.9% in December on a yearly basis. However, this is a part here that I want to emphasize. CREA, their senior economist, Sean Cathcart, said that we're expecting a 5.1% increase in sales in 2026. So not a huge increase, but they are expecting a slight increase. And they're still saying that affordability is going to be the constraint, coupled with the inventory, which has been an issue for the last 6 years pretty well. It's been a supply and demand issue that we've had across the entire country, which has actually led to a lot of the increase of price, especially here in New Brunswick, as we've had critically low inventory, which has put us into a seller's market for the majority of the last 5 years. And that's been a large factor in the increasing house prices in New Brunswick. So the important part to note here by CREA is that the sales began very slowly in 2026. They say that the monthly decline in national home sales was driven primarily by less activity in the greater Golden Horseshoe and southwestern Ontario, suggesting that the story was probably more about a historic winter storm than a downshift in demand. That's also notwithstanding the chilly start to the year that we continue to expect 2026 will ultimately be defined by pent-up demand for first-time buyers finally seeing a chance to enter the market. The January highlights are that the national home sales declined by 5.8% month over month. The actual, not seasonally adjusted, monthly activity came in at 16.2% below January 2025, and the number of newly listed properties jumped 7.3% on a month-to-month basis, while the HPI, the home price index, fell almost 1% over month, and it's down almost 5% on a year-over-year basis. And the actual national average sale price dipped 2.6 on a year-over-year basis in January 2026. So the Canadian real estate market as a whole is currently sitting in a balanced market as well. Now, it has been consistently in the balanced market pretty well from January 2025. It's dipped into the sellers just briefly here. So you can see on this chart, the residential market balance. Anything below the 4-month line here is considered a seller's market, and anything above it is a balanced market. So between 4 months and 6 months of inventory is a balanced market. Anything above that 6 month is you're in a buyer's market. So you can see that the broader national market has been creeping up ever since July 2022. It was starting to creep into that balanced portion. So that's signifying that there's certain places that are pulling us up into the more balanced market. And I'm sure that's some of the larger markets, as it's mentioned, some of the larger cities, Vancouver, Toronto, that are pulling us up into kind of these balanced territories, as some of these markets are seeing a slowdown and a cooling compared to what we had for the strong sellers market prior to 2022 in the country as a whole. For the Canadian residential average price, we hit our peak right around January, February, March of 2021, and we've had a stark correction ever since then, which has put us right around the $700,000 price range, where we kind of hit a peak right over the $800,000 range. It looks like it was around $820,000 for the average price across the nation, and that was again roughly February, March, April of 2021. That's enough on the national scale. Let's zoom in specifically to New Brunswick to see exactly what's going on in our province. So Canada as a whole seen a very slow start to 2026, and the story is fairly similar here in New Brunswick. So the number of homes sold through the MLS system in New Brunswick totaled 455 units in January 2026. Now that is actually a decrease of 3% from January 2025. Home sales were 6.4% below the 5-year average and 5.2% below the 10-year average for the month of January. So let's pull something up here. So the residential sales activity, January only, we're seeing it right around the 10-year average. So we're pretty well right on par, and actually a little bit above what it was before 2019 as well. So if we're looking at the residential new listings, then we're seeing we are also right around the 10-year average, which is pretty promising. And I'm excited to show you some data for St. John because it does get pretty interesting with the residential new listings. Now, the residential active listings for January only, still very much below the 10-year average. And as we mentioned, supply and demand still being an issue. Even in the country as a whole, it's also an issue for us here in New Brunswick. And the residential months of inventory has us right around a balanced market. We're actually almost right in the middle of a balanced market. So like I said, anything under 4 months of inventory is considered a balanced market for the month of January. So you can see that the province has a pattern of being right around this spot for the last 3 years. Every January, we've put ourselves towards the balanced market position. And one of my favorites, the residential average price in New Brunswick, has us right around the $325,000 mark. I'll get you an exact here in a second. But one thing I really like to look at is the chart and the waves on the chart. So you can see that the province sees the average house price going up in the summer months, and then it always dips back down coming into the winter, and then we see it scoop up here into the summer of 18, back down into the winter, 19, up in the summer of 19. And you can see that pattern continuing, right? We see it. And then, of course, 2020, and we see a big jump up here, but you can see the same pattern rising and then falling. And it's really got this wave pattern. So I am expecting to see this creep back up here over the 350s coming into the spring and summer market here in New Brunswick. However, that's not a guarantee, but that is what I'm predicting and expecting to see. So now let's do a quick glimpse of the New Brunswick real estate market in each of the major cities and what's going on in their particular markets here for the month of January 2026. So as you can see here, Fredericton had 94 sales. They had 152 new listings, and their average home price is $319,000. Well, Moncton has seen the most amount of sales for any of the major cities, and they had way more listings than every other major marketplace at 324 new listings coming on the market in January. And they have the highest average home price at $373,000, almost $374,000. Now, the northern region, which is always a little bit lower on the average home price, but they even seen 83 sales, 149 new listings come on the market, which is right on par with St. John and with the Fredericton area. Now, their average home price was $235,000. So the northern region of New Brunswick has probably one of the most competitive and lowest bars of entry for the average house price. So St. John has seen 96 sales for the month of January. We've seen 156 new listings come on the market, and our average house price is $338,000 for the month of January. Now, knowing all of that, where the province is at a whole is 455 sales across the entire province, 781 new listings, and the average house price is $329,000. So St. John remains slightly above the average, almost $10,000 above the provincial average house price, while Moncton holds the standard for having the highest average house price per major city in the province. And from my experience tracking the data, Moncton normally has double the sales that we see here in St. John, the new listings that we see here in St. John as well, which is very, very interesting that they have so much more activity going on just an hour and a half away from us. While the very interesting thing is that Moncton is well into a balanced market as this is going on. So that may signify to me, possibly, that if we get into a balanced market here in St. John, and when that happens, that we could possibly start to see much more activity where the market loosens up slightly if that ends up happening. But we're going to figure out if that's happening here now. So let's zoom in to St. John and figure out what's going on here in this beautiful port city. What I'd love to do is pull up my website here, which I've recently redone for you beautiful people. So I hope you enjoyed. I'm going to put the link to my website below if anybody does want to follow along with the numbers or check them after the video. So what's going on in the St. John real estate market? So as I mentioned at the start of the video, St. John is now at 4.3 months of inventory, meaning we are in a balanced market here. And initially, that can be jarring to some people going, geez, we were in such a strong seller's market. Is it shifting that fast? Well, for the month of January, yes, it did. And it put us right into a balanced market here. And what we also seen was an 18% drop versus last month on the homes sold. And we also seen an 18% drop in the dollar volume sold. But what we also did see is an increase of 1.7% of our average home price year over year, okay? So going through the charts here, the sales activity versus new listings, okay? So this shows us how fast the market is absorbing the inventory that's coming on the market. So the first thing I want to look at is the sales activity versus the new listings. So I find this chart super interesting, especially understanding that the last 4 or 5 years have been such an aggressive seller's market that we're really not used to. But understanding that and knowing that the new listings that come in here are being absorbed and sold almost as fast as they're coming. You know, as you can see, the the new listings is the bar behind, and the sales activity is the orange line here. So the sales are almost keeping right up to the new listings. Actually, some months you're seeing more sales happening than listings coming on the market. But you are starting to see that decouple as we're coming into 2025 here. And I do find it very interesting to look at the chart visually like this, as opposed to the way that the data is presented to us on a chart like this, which doesn't tell me very much. I'm much more visual. So I find the charts on my website here on my market stats page to be much more of a visual representation of what's going on here in the St. John market. Now, an important one that people really like to know is what's going on with the dollar volume and average home price. This is a great chart here to figure out exactly what's happening. So the dollar volume is how much total real estate was sold during that month. What's the total dollar volume of all of the collective real estate sold through the MLS? And then we have the average house price showing in front of that on the orange line here. And this is a very interesting representation as well, because we can see the average home price fluctuating, as I mentioned, when we were looking at the national and the provincial trends. We have similar trends here in St. John, where we see the top of the average house price, hitting around April, May in that spring market. And then you always see a little bit of a dip coming into the summer, but then you'll kick it back up coming into your fall market. And the reason I think this is personally is I believe that sometimes people have plans in the summer and they're kind of checking out from the activity going on. A lot of people that are strategically selling, let's say, waterfront properties. They want to hit that beautiful spring market, be one of the first waterfront properties on there, so that when people are looking for waterfront, that's one of the first options coming on in the spring market, which is a great strategy, because there's a certain demographic for waterfront properties. And, a lot of people are looking at them more in the spring and summer markets compared to the fall or the winter markets. So this is a great chart to analyze the ebbs and flows of the market. The highest that we've had in the last 5 years is actually in June of 2022, when we've seen the most amount of volume, 95.5 million. And at that time, the average home price was $293,000. And that's, again, in June 2022. And where that compares to today, as of last month, is we've seen roughly $32 million of real estate sold. But that's right on par with just about every other January. So that's something to keep in mind, is that when we look at these stats of, month over month, what's going on, it's always good to compare this to what's happened in the past. Even before we seen our peak dollar volume, which was, again, June 2022, that January, we only seen $39 million sold in January of 2022, right? So that's a huge difference. So as we come into January, things are naturally always a little bit slower this time of year. Now, moving down here to the average home price trend chart that I created, I built in a feature here so that you can compare the average home price of a date within the last 5 years. So let's say somebody bought in July of 2021, then you can compare that to the market today. So from July 2021, you can see that the home price has gone up roughly 37%. And this can be a great indicator of how much your equity has increased from the time that you purchased it to the current market value today. And this can be just a great tool. Now, of course, if you've done things to the house, there's been renovations, you've made additions, you've improved it, well then that just increases the equity as well. But even if you just maintain the house and kept it in good order, then this can be a great baseline to show how much the average has increased or decreased depending when you bought it, which, really there's only a couple months that you'd see a decrease, and that's only if you bought it within the last year. Now, the thing that I mentioned at the start of the video about the months of inventory and how this has happened in the past is right here on the months of inventory and sales to listing ratio. So as I mentioned at the very first, we entered into a balanced market for January. We've also entered into a balanced market in January of 2024. And we were almost there in 25 as well. And again in 23. So we have been creeping up towards the balance side, closer and closer as we get into January, but then we always see a strong push down into the seller's market coming into the spring. I say always, but what I'm saying is in the last 3 to 5 years, we've been seeing that pretty consistently. So in saying that, I do not believe there is any reason to panic, and here's my advice for buyers and sellers coming into the spring of 2026. If you're a seller, you're likely in a good position if you've bought within the last few years. The prices are still holding very strongly. However, the days of listing it at an extremely high price and still expecting multiple offers are well behind us. And I've seen this happen multiple times, even in the last few months, with a few listings that I've taken buyers to where they listed it at a certain price which already seemed very close to market value, if not even a little bit above, and that they expected multiple offers. Well, I think it's shot them in the foot. I don't want to speak affirmatively for that, but I've seen listings come on the market where they thought they were going to expect multiples and they didn't. So pricing now is one of the most strategic portions of making sure that your listing is going to be broadcasted and presented properly and in the most favorable way so that you can still sell it within the fastest amount of time for the highest dollar value possible. The best way to do that is still by listing it actually a little bit under where the market value should be with the strategies that have been used over the last 5 years of listing it, holding offers till X date, normally somewhere between 4 to 6 days of listing it. I always try to get a weekend in there so that you can run a nice open house and you can let the neighbors know, and you got that weekend for people to see it in case they were working and they couldn't get in during the work week, that you get maximum exposure. And I got a certain strategy that I like to do with my listings. If you're interested, let me know, and I can actually leave a link to my website. I have forms that you can fill out as a seller, and then we can start a nice conversation on exactly what is going to work for you and your situation, because everybody has a different scenario and a different situation, different needs, wants, timelines, property. Everybody's situation is completely different. So I've created a form that's going to help me tailor the conversations directly to you. If you're interested, I'll leave it in the link below. For my buyers out there, there's still good news because we're seeing more listings than we have in the last 5 years. I think that we're going to start to see slightly more inventory coming on the market, especially as we're coming into the spring. And the fact that people now need to price things right and that there's properties that are being priced improperly and sitting longer gives buyers some leverage to come in and actually negotiate again on properties that are not selling. So make sure to check with your real estate agent to see if properties are available, because for the longest time, we pretty well just had to go with new listings and assume that everything else was not available. But that's no longer the case, as some listings are starting to sit a little bit longer, either due to pricing, product, marketing, whatever the reason is, but that makes an advantage for the buyers to be able to come in and do some negotiating again. Now, that's not the case in every scenario because we are still seeing the multiples happening when listed properly with the right marketing strategies. But what it does mean is that there's more opportunity for the buyers than there has been over the last 5 years, in my opinion. So if you're a buyer and you're looking to get in the market, on my website, I have a buyer intake form. And if you take 3 minutes and you fill that out, because this is going to be your largest investment. So filling out this form is going to help us have a high-level conversation about exactly what you're looking for. Fill that out. I'm going to give you a call within 24 hours and we can set up a call to get the ball rolling. If you like the sound of that, the link is below. The fact that you've made it to the end and watched this entire video, I want to thank you very, very much. And my contact information is below as well. If you ever need anything, feel free to reach out, send me a text, call, email, anything along those lines. Thank you so much, and stay tuned for next month's market update.